Paul on the call as well, and he can let people in as they join.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So official start now. So I'll just quickly say a couple of words before I hand over to Terry, our host. This is the third roundtable for the exploring the need, purpose and scope of the Business Coalition and the Index for Healthier, Longer Lives. So this is the third. We've got one coming up on the 19th, the fourth one. And then, of course, we have the wrap-up session on the 22nd. I'll give a few more details, obviously, a little bit later on, but I'll let Terry start. And we're going to keep pretty ruthlessly to time, just to warn everybody. So, Terry, would you like to kick off?
Sure. Just so everybody knows who I am, my name is Terry O'Brien. I'm the founder and CEO of Longevity Leaders. For those of you who don't know who Longevity Leaders are, we're a network of mostly C-level executives that are concerned with all of the issues and challenges around longevity. We are focused on helping people extend health span. We do that through a number of different vehicles and mechanisms, but primarily our area of focus is in building conferences and events and forums and supporting a conversation and connecting the right peoples, whether that's enabling people to connect capital with ideas or otherwise. We're very, very supportive of the initiative that Tina has launched with the APPG, and with that in mind, we've agreed to partner with her and help her realize these very important conversations that are taking place. We also have our large-scale conference and events on longevity, which is actually taking place next week as a virtual experience. So if anyone is not yet registered for that or would like details on that, please do get in touch with me after this call. My role on this particular forum is really to help Tina on the back office side of things. I've got Paul Gilbertson, who's a co-host here and a member of my team, and we're going to be hopefully facilitating a smooth experience here for you. I think there's a couple of things with that in mind that would be quite helpful for us. One is if you could make sure that your names appear as they should be. So if you look on your screen, on your video, there's a little hamburger menu at the top right. You can click that and rename yourself to make sure that it is the most accurate name. That helps everyone. I think it also helps other people in the room see who you are. But from our side, it's useful to have that enabled. And otherwise, if you do experience technical glitches or questions as we move into sort of the breakout groups of this, please do send a private message to myself and I'll try to make sure that we resolve it. Sometimes people end up in the long rooms and that kind of thing. All you need to do is just ping me a note and I'll make sure you get placed in the right place. But that's it from me, other than to say I hope the conversation is as fruitful as the past three have been, and really just to hand the reins back to you, Tina, to take us forward.
Thank you so much, Terry. And I see Jeff Filkin, Lord Filkin, has entered the frame. So I'm going to hand over to Jeff. He'll say a few words before I say a few, and then we'll introduce our lead discussants, aiming to finish by 20 to 3 so that we can have our breakout group start on time. So Jeff, would you like to kick off?
Hello, Tina. Can you see me? Let me start the video. Let's try that.
Yes, there we go. We can see you now.
There we go. It's half of me at least. Just to say, glad to be on the call. Welcome to everyone. Just to give you the picture about what this is all about. When our report was launched in February, we saw it was absolutely clear that business could and should and would play a major role in improving the health of the nation. People strongly endorsed that view. And this process is about trying to define what a business coalition might do, of a coalition of businesses of a great variety, shaped by business, led by business, to try to accelerate the contributions business could make to improve the health of our nation. And the coronavirus epidemic has just made that even clearer how vital that is. It's not just now thinking about the long-term acute chronic conditions, but it's also how we deal with infectious diseases as well. So, big question, and we hope that the learning that we'll get from you will help us to develop a proposition to take forward the business coalition idea in discussion with government and Andy Briggs and others. Tina, back to you.
Yes, thank you, Jeff. So yes, as mentioned, this is the third roundtable, and I know we've been circulating the briefing notes to everybody, including, all the observers, etc. And you'll notice in the briefing notes, as the appendices, we've included some of the notes from the previous two roundtables. And the point of that is built. Every roundtable is informing the next one, and this is a process. And the other thing really to mention and highlight is that we are looking through all the chat questions. These are really important, so all observers in particular and everyone involved needs to keep firing off those questions and comments, because we are reviewing them. They were not part of the appendices that you've seen so far, but they are certainly informing our thought process, as we move towards the end, and of course eventually set up a task group. So please do send the chat questions through. We are looking at them, and I will pick up on a few of them right now, including also the comments that have come through in the post-meeting evaluation forms, which are also incredibly valuable, and I've been having some conversations with people on those points as well. So very, very quickly, just to highlight a couple of things that have come up in some of the chats so far and some of the comments. I think, as Jeff, this is very much what we're trying to do here, is to kind of break out of what does tend to happen with echo chambers. We are trying to be as open and participatory as possible, and I think people are appreciating that we are trying to reach out to as many diverse perspectives and opinions as possible. I think we do need and we do understand that at the end of this we need to be very, very focused on what we can take forward. There's been talk about the storytelling, how to engage the public, the 90-second sort of pitch, how to really galvanize the social movement. We're very, very conscious of this, and that of course will be where we move towards as we come out of this process. We do want to be an act tank rather than just a think tank. That was some of the other comments that came through. But just coming through, the kind of points that I have found quite interesting coming through some of the chat lines is, we are seeing this this health equals wealth, but also wealth equals health sort of connection. The pandemic has proved, without a doubt, that outcomes have been very, very different for those who can afford and who are better and who are better off, as from a health perspective, from an economic perspective. We also shouldn't make any assumptions about age. Everyone should be able to participate and contribute to these key decisions that we're all making. And some of the ideas that Sarah Harper put forward in the last call around age-integrated workforces, the need for lifelong learning, environmental focused built environments, the need for health literacy, technology that can be inclusive as possible. If you design for the extremes, you design for all, and working carers as a key group to support. We need to look at that. It's not just about those with childcare responsibilities, it's those with caring responsibilities. We need to make sure we look after this growing redundant labour force that is no doubt coming through. The concept of midlife MOTs, these are all sorts of the ideas that are coming through on the chats. We need to prepare our older members of the workforce for the impact on retirement and the impact on well-being and financial decisions. We need to address this ageism. This is a massive issue that keeps on coming up. And just a couple of other points. I think, and this is coming through in some of the press and the media about how people are seeing quality of life indicators as taking priority over the economy. So the sort of concepts that we've been looking at, for example, the Wellbeing Index in New Zealand, and Jacinda Ardern, who's obviously been getting a lot of praise for her response to COVID. These are the sorts of things coming through on the chat lines. And just to finish very, very quickly, I think the other thing that's really coming through is the paradigm shift from, in terms of how the society is organized, as hierarchical power structures, decentralized sort of structures. A book by Frederick Laloux was mentioned by one as a book that has been written a little while ago, but is still very, very relevant today. So these are some of the comments that have come through, and the point about this is that we are, digesting everyone's feedback. So please do keep sending those chats through. So with that, I'll finish for now. But our first, we've got 7 discussants. We're going to finish promptly at 20 to 3. Our first one, who's been doing some very interesting work, he's on shared value assessment with Co-op. David Luckin is going to tell us how they've approached their particular index. So David, we're going to hand over to you for 4 minutes.
Thanks, Tina, and thanks everyone. It's been fascinating hearing the range of perspectives over the previous round tables. I'm going to focus on some key themes that we've seen coming through in planning our business response to the crisis at Co-op, and through engaging with the communities that we serve. And I'll touch on the wellbeing index that you mentioned there, Tina.
Excellent.
First, just a quick reminder of Co-op and a reflection on values. We're a large commercial organisation, major food retailer, largest funeral provider in the UK, legal services, insurance, and a new health business. Got a total of 3,500 stores and funeral homes, and around 60,000 colleagues across the UK. And just to pause there for a moment to say that they are doing an amazing job in communities and adjusting to new ways of working through the crisis. In terms of values, we are also a co-op, as well as a large commercial organisation. This means that we're owned by our 4.6 million members, and we're founded on a set of values and principles shared by the wider cooperative movement that embed cooperation into our business model, and I think are really relevant for the exam question here. So without getting into any sort of geeky detail on cooperative values and principles, my reflection would be that cooperation between sectors, between businesses, and actually between businesses and the customers that they serve is going to be crucial to helping us move forwards through the crisis and beyond, and more broadly in terms of the exam question. The themes that I'd like to pick up on in terms of learning from the crisis are solidarity, inequality, and localism. Firstly, in terms of solidarity, it would clearly be untrue, as you mentioned in the intro, Tina, to say that we're all feeling the impacts of the crisis equally, but there is a definite evidence of a desire to offer support to others in a range of different ways. So I think for businesses, this points to the importance of embedding values in customer propositions. And one thing that we've done in this space is enabling members to transfer their personal membership reward for shopping with us to support others. And we've had more than 50,000 members do that in a couple of weeks ahead of our major comms push on this, which is actually this week. In terms of inequality, we're very aware that some of our 4.6 million members and some of the communities that we serve are more vulnerable than others. And something that we can bring to this is the Community Wellbeing Index that we developed a couple of years back, working with the Young Foundation and others. It brings together more than 80 data sources to give us insights into the factors that underpin collective local wellbeing at a really granular local level across the UK. And we're using this index to understand which communities are more vulnerable and to inform our response, for instance, in terms of targeting community funding. It's available online, and we're also very happy to share data to support the work of others. Finally, in terms of localism, we've been trialling different ways of getting food to vulnerable customers during the crisis, including linking into local volunteering networks. And the thing that's come through really clearly is that this sort of support is being organised sort of hyper-locally, really neighbourhood level rather than town or city level. We've been plugging into that and supporting it through a national network of community roles called Member Pioneers that we've been developing for the last couple of years. But I think there's something here about, obviously digital spaces have become more important, but really local spaces have become more important during the crisis as well.
So 4 minutes is up. So
I guess just to conclude, we're still learning about the impact of the crisis and what it will mean for us as a business, but opportunities for cooperation, I think, have got to be very important for all of us in the coming months.
Excellent, incredibly interesting points, David. So we're going to now go to Samantha Mauger, Chief Executive of Third Age Trust. Sam, are you able to take the floor?
Yeah, thank you very much. I work with Third Age Trust with U3As, quite similar to Co-op in some ways. So groups of people who are retired coming together in communities all over the United Kingdom, shaped into 1,000 different charities, 440,000 retired people. So I'm looking at this exam question through that prism and working with older people for the last 30 years. The key challenges, from my perspective, to think about are loneliness and the impact on well-being, the major health determinants around smoking, diet, inactivity and alcohol consumption, the aspect of stereotyping and assumptions, which has been referred to already, digital inclusion, which actually affects people's ability to get involved, and how people interact with their environment. I think that from working with a business perspective, the focus, in my opinion, should be on years of health well lived. In other words, how to keep people healthy and put knowledge and responsibility in people's hands. People want to be able to do something about their health, but sometimes it's quite difficult for people to be able to find that support and that way through, particularly with preventative services being pulled back. Older people in particular bothered about worrying their GP and only be able to ask about one thing at a time. So I think, but yet individuals can make major change, as the COVID crisis has shown, and in terms of youth VAs and the Co-op, as we've heard, that can happen. And I think there's something about harnessing that self-help culture and making it very local to make that change. So from a business perspective, and looking at every business here, I'm thinking that there is the opportunity for businesses to build in time and space for people in business community, whether they're employed or communities around them, to speak about aspects of health that apply to them. Diet, weight, blood pressure, exercise, all of that. Any business can do that. And that helps people take control over their health and offers people that very informal peer support, which quite often people are looking for. And organisations like Weight Watchers already provide very well. And encouraging support and healthy workplaces in the workplace so that people can feel fine about taking a lunch break, don't feel there's some support if they're feeling stressed. It's fine for them to take it up on their own, so rocking up every time people feel concerned about their own health. And that ability to have a culture of healthy play will also feed out into people's family commitments and personal life, which is really important. And also embedding a culture where, as we mentioned already, no assumptions are made about age, and that's about changing attitudes, which is right from the top. And that's really important, so that people feel no matter how old they are, they've got investment in them and they've got a contribution to make. And embedding in that sort of flexible working relationships going forward. I think one of the vital areas I say in terms of what businesses can offer is enabling employees to channel out that healthy workplace concept out into the community, so that people do have time and are supported to exercise and eat together, and communities, businesses open up some of their spaces to communities to meet and work together and offer more volunteering days. In terms of values, I would say it would be great if businesses could build healthy cultures around being age aware and challenging ageism in all its forms, empowering people, listening to and empowering individuals to shape their own healthy practices at work and in the community, investing in health and well-being and skilling up the workforce, embedding health practices in the wider community, and enabling the space around businesses to be good and enable them to be a good place to live. So I'd echo what David had said just a moment ago.
Thanks, Sam. Your time, unfortunately, is up, though, so you'll have to close. But yes, I think you were just about finished. But thank you so much, Sam. I'm trying not to make the alarm bells go too loud. Now, next up is Carly Tutty Johnson, who is the Older People's Programme Manager at Public Health England, and interested to hear about the Healthy Ageing Consensus Statement. So, Carly, would you like to take the floor?
Yes, so I'd like to talk to you about the Healthy Ageing Consensus Statement, which it sets out a vision of healthy ageing. It's something that's been signed by over 100 organisations across a variety of sectors, and it sets out 5 key principles of healthy ageing, all of which are relevant, more than relevant in the context of COVID, and all of which businesses can contribute to in some way. So I just want to sort of run through all 5 of them with you. The first principle is putting prevention first and ensuring timely access to services and support when needed. So obviously during lockdown, we've seen examples of people doing exercise that wouldn't usually be exercising, and we've seen people undertaking exercise in ways that they wouldn't usually do, like, for example, undertaking a virtual yoga class from their living room. So there's an opportunity here for leisure and fitness industries, for example, to build on that momentum, think innovatively about their offer, and playing a key role in getting more people moving. Likewise, we know that some people have become more inactive as a result, and in some cases more frail. So again, there's a need here to provide an offer to recondition these people. And of course, there'll be a backlog of health needs as an indirect consequence of COVID. People have been delaying their non-urgent treatments, dentistry, podiatry, for example, and these will inevitably need to be addressed at some stage. So undoubtedly, the NHS will be welcoming innovations from technology companies around digital solutions for how to handle that workload and get people access to services and support that they need. The second principle is about removing barriers and creating more opportunities for older people to contribute to society. And by this we mean enabling people of all ages to work if they want to, volunteer or contribute in any way of value to them. So employers here play a really key role in welcoming older people back into the workforce. And we've already seen some really good examples. Lots of us are working from home. Flexible working has really increased during the crisis. But those policies themselves on flexible working, volunteering, and supporting carers will be ever more important as we move forward. Again, we've seen some major innovations in many businesses offering services, a major move to online. But alongside this, it would be great to see businesses providing a digital literacy offer to upskill those people who might otherwise be excluded, which we know that many of them will be older people. And I know, for example, Barclays is doing something along those lines. The third principle is ensuring good homes and communities. So never has it been more important to have appropriate, safe housing for people to live independently for longer. So not only do we need to think about the housing stock and future-proofing new homes, but there's also lots of opportunities for technology companies again and manufacturers to find innovative solutions for assisted living for people in their current homes. Fourth principle, narrowing health inequalities. We know that COVID has disproportionately affected certain groups, and we know that many people are financially impacted from this. Again, businesses could look at ways to incentivise our minimum wage heroes or provide more stable work for our zero contract workers. And the final principle is challenging ageism. This has been at the forefront during this crisis. Older people have been portrayed often as weak, helpless, vulnerable, and we know that that's just not a realistic representation of many people in this age category. So businesses play a key role in challenging ageist language, imagery, culture and practices. So back to the question, I see those 5 principles as being our core ingredients for contributing to health, and the value that really underpins all of those is collaboration. I'd say the principles themselves aren't particularly anything new, but the collaborative approach to driving them forward is. So I'd really encourage anybody that isn't a signatory to join us. I'd be delighted if more businesses would sign up. I'll share details of how to do that on the group chat. And be part of a knowledge hub network for sharing good practice and co-developing measures of success. And there's power in numbers. The more organisations we can bring into a consensus, the more influence we'll have over those big levers to change. So things like policy, legislation, finance and media. Thank you.
Excellent, Carly. Yes, more power together, absolutely, and that's what we're all about here. Just to make an interesting point about the prevention principle, your first one of the comments that did come through is how the insurance industry really needs to step up to the plate on that and do more. So that was just a feedback, one of the comments that came through.
Thank you.
Yes, but fantastic. So thank you, Carly. So next up is Professor Carol Brain from Cambridge. Carol, would you like to take the stage, please? Carol?
Yep, thanks, sorry.
Excellent. There you are.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, and I'm very pleased to have been able to be a part of that process that Carly has just described. So, my key point is that we don't really have a mechanism for bringing the necessary evidence generation and the capacity to do it at the interface between business and the academic and, as it were, the real world. And this requires us to develop a way of bringing a range of relevant academic expertise together with business that is relevant to individuals, households, locality and communities, and that's whether communities are physical or digital. And the ingredients for the metrics that we've been talking about and are the focus of this workshop roundtable can draw on existing knowledge, crucially need to build on them, and they need to be based on evidence. So just to give you a bit of context, my background is medicine, and I moved into epidemiological research on older populations focused on brain health, and I've been doing that for 35 years. And then public health became a very kind of really prominent in terms of the skills that are brought to that discipline. Or it sounds like a single discipline, but actually it's many, many disciplines, because it is about the art and science of improvement of health and well-being. And to do that, you have to effectively generate new empirical evidence. And so I did that. I've been doing that for 35 years. And I've seen how it's used from community and individual and society. And it's given me a real knowledge of how rhetoric often doesn't fit the evidence base, and just how hard it is to bring these together. An example of that is the fact that we have demonstrated that dementia is now a nearly quarter less common age for age than it was 30 years ago. And this wasn't achieved through a pill or an individualized app, but through societal action post-war. And you may not be aware of this because the rhetoric is very different from the evidence on the ground. So I'm arguing for building building out from the discussions here on the basis of good evidence. So what have we learned from dementia work? That research has to be created from the evidence from lived lives. Otherwise, the research world creates a kind of bubble of its own, unlinked to societal needs. And in this, the strong business incentives have been clear from both pharma and technology in the field of dementia research. And it is really important to bring lived life, business and academia together. And I think this has been really highlighted by the COVID pandemic, because we've really shown, there's been a spotlight put onto the areas in which we didn't and we don't have good understanding, and where we have neglected elements of society because of the way that we've structured ourselves. So to come out of that, we need an evidence base, and we need evidence generation that is robust. It mustn't just serve ideology or whims. And it has to say, well, this is the evidence, and we've got to really understand that and not just set it aside because it's inconvenient. So that needs to be based on sound values. And my final point is that I really would suggest we set up a small working group to address the interfaces so that we can create a business academic coalition that allows a genuine partnership that's looking at population health and healthy aging, because that's been very challenging to date, and I think it could be done.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Carol. So next up we have Ben Page, who has been involved in all the roundtables so far. So Ben, would you like to come through and present your perspective? I think it's a good segue for your experience.
I'll do it as an employer as much as a sort of social scientist or researcher. So, I mean, the exam question is measuring business contribution to health, and I think we've just heard some great stuff about what business can do in its local community, but ultimately, for most businesses, they're going to be busy just trying to stay afloat in the next immediate period in the recession that is looming. And therefore, that means a particular focus, I think, on their own staff and looking at things. So, but with this agenda, I think it's notable that whereas, say, mental health has made leaps and bounds in a general sense in terms of engaging business, gender equality and some of those initiatives have made leaps and bounds, ageism is nowhere in comparison to those two. So, I don't have to report to the government how many people over 50 I employ. I do have to report on the gender pay gap. So I think there's a lot in terms of outputs that we should look at. And what would be interesting, of course, is to compare those businesses that are more flexible employers, that are sensitive to ageism, and come up with some measures that would allow us to compare businesses that do what we might like, that are age-friendly employers in the language of the Centre for Better Ageing or other partners in that area. And so look at things like the mental health support programs that they have, look at support for things like midlife resets and just checking your finances and your health in your 40s or even earlier. Financial planning. Most people have mad ideas about how much money they're going to need to get by in retirement. People think in Britain that they can live happily on a £250,000 nest egg and that it will deliver them about £35,000 a year. I'm afraid it won't, and they're massively wrong. We could look at the age profile of employers, of staff in different businesses, and actually get it published to show where people are just effectively edging out anybody over the age of 50. My industry is famous for it, and one of the reasons I'm involved in this is because I'm 55 and I want to be around for a while. So let's look at how different types of industries and different businesses are effective at retaining older workers. And as we've already discussed on this call, COVID-19 is already showing us how we can work much more flexibly remotely, how people can adopt their working style to quite dramatic changes in circumstances. And that might be something that we could see as part of a reset. Society will go on ageing despite COVID-19, but maybe we can have a reset where employers can become much more flexible. And we could therefore build a bank of measures to compare and contrast and even politely name and shame different employers and different sectors, perhaps. Those would be my ingredients for measuring business contribution to health.
Thank you so much, Ben. Very, very interesting and very relevant. Picks up on a lot of the points that have been made already on ageism in particular. So Henry Elphick, would you like to go next from Langwiesen?
Thank you very much, Sheila. So I run a business called Langwiesen. We're a healthcare business intelligence provider. But more importantly, we provide data to the ONS. So trying to measure things like businesses' contribution to health is something which we grapple with all the time. Our data is for the independent healthcare and the social care sector in the UK. It goes to ONS and then it's fed on to the World Health Organization, the OECD, and certainly for the moment anyway, to Eurostat. And what you learn, and I'm sure that Ben knows this as well, is that statistics can always be misleading. So when we talk about health and wealth, the US spends twice as much GDP on healthcare than we do. Japan has many older people. Korea spends less on health. But if you look at the coronavirus outcomes, they've been dramatically different. So I want to touch on three things. Why are we going to measure these things? Why would business want to do it? What are we going to measure and how are we going to make it happen? In terms of why you would do it, I actually think that business is already pretty aligned here. Health and life expectancy is starting to plateau, and you have got an elder workforce who is going to be in employment for longer, and you want them to stay healthy and be productive. So all the CSR, ESG programs, everything that the corporate does in terms of giving you access to primary care on the new app, occupational health, PMI, etc., you're all fully aligned in wanting to keep people in the workforce healthy and productive for as long as possible. I think that there has been a change of emphasis because the sheer scale of state intervention has impacted the business sector, and I think that social contract has changed, and that therefore there is a different balance between the stakeholders, and the emphasis on focusing on your employees in preference to perhaps your shareholder returns has changed. In addition, I also think there's been a change in the political landscape, and then Nicky Morgan got up a few months ago and was talking about no health without mental health, and that whole concept between going to hospital and being treated for your hip replacement as opposed to for any underlying mental health conditions has changed. So what you're looking to treat has changed. So why would you do it? I think you do it because it's good business sense. What do you measure? This is more difficult because, again, if you look at the level of reporting that corporates have to do at the moment, annual reports are now 3 times larger than they were 10 years ago. There are so many KPIs between PERC, shareholders, corporate governance, legislation. So you've got to be very careful about what you ask for. In addition, you've got complexities around GDPR, data protection, and e-privacy. And if we're talking about trying to benchmark people's health or contribute to health, you've got to know very, very clearly what you're asking for. At the moment, the ONS actually has a well-being data set. They started in 2011. It became part of the national statistics in 2014. And it's now a time series which you can follow. But other countries, Bhutan has gross national happiness. The UAE has a Minister of State for Happiness. It's difficult, though, to identify the right metrics. So it probably makes more sense to look at things like absenteeism, staff churn, satisfaction surveys, use existing data. So finally, how do you make it happen? And here, I really do believe it's about making it good business sense, aligning incentives, and ultimately making sure that financially you want to do it. And the last thing, in the last 10 seconds, is I do think the state has a role to play. Because unless the state is seen to incentivise business, it isn't going to happen. So I'll end there.
Thank you so much, Henry. Fantastic points and very, very well made. So we're doing well on time, and I'm going to bring in our last lead discussant, Graham Boyd, and then we'll break into the breakout group. So Graham, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. So I'm running a startup program and a consulting business all around reinventing business, and I hope what I will say will be at least mildly provocative, if not very provocative. So I imagine most of you, just as I do, want to live a life that is both long and fulfilling, where fulfilling means that everything in and around you fulfills your needs across all levels in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The question I will put is, do we need to think what has been unthinkable in business up to now to do so? Think beyond even the co-op that David has brought in, beyond what the other speakers have brought in. I believe yes. I believe that over the next decade, we need new fundamentals in business. And I would love it if we would explore that today. Coming back to our needs that we must be met to have a long and fulfilling life, all of our individual needs are deeply interconnected with each other. Each of us and all of nature is far more interdependent than any of us can see. The job of business is to provide for all of our needs, but business is not structured to do that today. It cannot actually form the kind of deep, long-term coalitions that we need to deal with the challenges we're facing today and create the kind of long and fulfilling lives we want to live. A core question I've long asked myself is why? What is holding our dysfunctional system stable in its dysfunctionality? Why is business failing to do the jobs we need? Why have we not met all of the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals already? And those, by the way, show clearly the interdependence of all of them. Why have we not hit the Transparency Task Force's 12 financial development goals? Why is each UK citizen today still 17% down in their wealth versus before the 2007 crash? And that's before COVID hit. One reason is because business is still incorporated and regulated to do the job it was invented to do 400 years ago, attracting and multiplying only financial capital. I argue that this is one of the core reasons why we are in the situation today, and why vital approaches like the circular economy, like the triple bottom line, the B corporation, conscious capitalism, and so many more have fallen short of delivering the outcomes we need. The good news is that with a few strategic changes, business can solve multiple challenges with single actions. All we need to do is use the existing legislation to reinvent the fundamentals. The key message is we have everything we need in company law. The change I believe we need is to reflect the interconnectedness between our needs and all of the stakeholders in society and our economy. Reflect that in how we structure our incorporation. We need multi-stakeholder incorporations such as, for those who are on speaker view and can see the screen, incorporations such as the Fair Shares Commons at level 4, that include all stakeholders in governance. If we do that, and we do the other 3 levels below, we will have local economies that deliver what we need, and a national economy and society that delivers what we need. The good news, as I said, is we can do this today. All we need is the willingness to do something different.
Okay, I'm going to cut you there. Last point, yes?
Something fundamentally better. Can we expect to get fundamentally better results?
Fantastic, Graham. Thank you so much for setting the scene, I guess, and lifting our aspirations to a wider plane as we break into the breakout groups. So in a few seconds, we'll all be whisked away seamlessly and hopefully without any technical hitches, if we've all been downloading our Zoom accounts, into the breakout room. So we have 5 breakout room leaders. We have up to about 4 breakout participants. We have 20 minutes for us to examine the exam question. All observers will be also randomly allocated to each of the 5 breakout rooms. You're asked to be kept to keep silent, but it is prerogative of the facilitators to also pull in people should there be the chance to do so. So with that, we're going to go into breakout groups, and all breakout group facilitators, please remember, if you can, to press your record button in the top corner of your screens. Just means we can capture everything from each of the breakout sessions. So we'll re-emerge in 20 minutes to hear the feedback from the 5 groups and then have a wider discussion. So keep the questions going on the chat line. So with that, can we go into our breakout groups, please, Paul and Terry? So we're in breakout room 5. So Letitia should be on the line. Letitia, are you there? Letitia? I don't see Letitia. Now, I'm just wondering whether any of the other breakout room people are there. I don't see any. So let me just quickly chat to Paul just to see where Letitia is. Just bear with me one moment. I'm just going to send a message to Paul. Terry, do we have Letitia with us?
No, she doesn't appear to have joined the call today.
Okay. All right.
So I put you in.
Okay, that's fine. No, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. I'll facilitate on her behalf. So apologies for that. She's probably got held up. I know she's had a busy day. So what we're going to do is we will have a discussion around our exam question. And we will go around the table. I know we've got a few faces, so I don't see Ruth, but I do see Janet, and I do see, I believe, Tara. So Janet, would you like to go first? Janet, with your thoughts.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Janet. Thank you.
Okay. I thought that the most important phrase that came up was that rhetoric often doesn't fit the evidence on the ground. And I really do think that's terribly important. All the things we read, I'm thinking of rhetoric as being something that's put out as information to the public in whatever form. All the things we read, all the things we hear, and often all the things we say. I am an 80-year-old woman, and I work regularly as a voice practitioner, but also I'm a guide at Kew Gardens, and I know very well that there are many, many, many people who are 65 and over who are working flat out daily and going walking and etc. etc. And we're not the lucky ones, we're the average of our age group. And it's this kind of thing that we need to tell the general public, that as you get older, you don't have to get decrepit. Will that do, I think?
Absolutely. So challenging our perceptions about people as they grow older is critical, and of course with ageism as well, that's a critical issue to address. I see Tara there. I'm going to turn to you next, Tara, if I may. Would you like to have the stage, Tara, in terms of our exam question?
Sure. Hello, Tina.
Hi,
Hello,
Tara.
My name is Tara McLeod, and I'm a founder of a company called The Common Land, and we're an innovation consultancy that helps businesses understand and respond to the opportunities that changing demographics provide due to longevity. And we focus on product, service, and the built environment design, and promote age-neutral design and intergenerational responses. I personally have been involved in research in both consumer and academics throughout my entire career, so I've looked at this question very much through a research lens. And when I look at the exam question about what are the core ingredients to measure, I have more questions than I have answers, because I don't think we've really landed on it. Yeah. When I reviewed the various instruments, such as the quality of life measures and the mental wellness measures and the comparison above beyond GDP, we haven't actually said exactly what it is we're trying to measure, and we don't actually have defined what our ask is to the people that we're asking to respond to this. So when I look at the instruments that we looked at, my key observation is they're very high-level collective questions. You know, they're about the environment, they're about hunger, etc. But for our particular needs, I think a greater specificity may be involved in this. So if we're looking at industry generally, that's one way of looking at it. If we're looking in the workforce, if we're looking in the home, if we're looking across industries, that require a different set of questions and measurements. So I have that. I also think we need to understand how we're going to apply the information that is gleaned. So we ask if we're just providing this for industry to say, these are some nice things you can be thinking about, or is it going to be an instruction? You have got to conform to this very much the way that the B Corp program works. They have a very structured way of doing things, and you have to adhere to it to actually get their seal of approval. So I suppose back to measurement again, what is the clear purpose of it? What are the applications of the results, both initially what comes out and over time? And I have two final points. I don't think we have to try and boil the ocean. I think there may not be just one questionnaire or one set of measurements, but there may be a number of different ones, and the way that you design it most appropriately is through test and learn. I think the other thing is that questionnaire design should be done with consumers, not just specialists, not just medics, not just business, but by bringing in and co-creating with people themselves. So I suppose to sum up, it's being clear on the question, clearing on what the ask is to be measured, clear on the audiences, so is it business, is it government, is it consumer, is it individual industry, clear on the reason for the research and the application of the results, and also to co-create the design across the multiple stakeholder groups.
Excellent. Fantastic, Tara. And I think you've also highlighted, I think, some of the issues around when you talk about co-creation, and it's the collaboration piece, and that picks up also on some of the themes that have been coming out very, very strongly, in the interconnectivity of everything, which is potentially one of the reasons why a lot of these indices haven't worked so well so far. But let's move on to get some views. I see two of our other participants here. I'm going to go to Pritesh next. Pritesh. Hi, Pritesh.
Hi, Tina. Thank you for the invite.
Thank you.
I think that I've got things to say that basically reinforce the messages that have already been said through the presentations and the speakers. So when we're talking about measure, I think one of the things that we've seen in healthcare in particular with the quality outcome frameworks is you need to be really careful about what you measure, because you have unintended consequences of measurement. And the way, I suppose, capitalist society works is that you optimize around your metrics, and you release efficiencies to maximize around your metrics. So I think it's very important to make sure that we fully consider what we are measuring and what the possible unintended consequences of that may be. So when I mentioned QOF, what we found with QOF is that there's been a huge increase in the amount of activity, which hasn't necessarily translated into improved health or improved care, but it has increased the quality and the consistency of care. So, and that's something that I believe should be considered. The systems approach that was mentioned, I think, is super important, and can avoid duplication, bringing strengths and complementary working together. So it's making sure you're aligned, both through your incentives and your activities. Also, another thing that we have been debating quite strongly within the healthcare system recently is around screening. So when you look for something wrong, you're highly likely to find that there is something wrong. And again, what are the consequences of that? So if you were going to improve people's healthcare by doing the health checks, I suppose, and then that kind of MOT for health, then you are effectively screening, you are looking for something that's wrong. And the implications of that might be that people then have to go through a number of unnecessary tests, so tests that wouldn't, I suppose, tests that end up finding negatives, false positives, affect the quality of life, etc., etc. And it might be something benign. So how do you balance that?
Yes.
And it related to that is also what's then the impact on the healthcare system. So one of the things that we're quite concerned around is that if you have things like the wearables, for example, so I'm sure you've seen the news, things around AFib detection or atrial fibrillation detection through Apple Watch, etc., etc. So these are hopefully good devices that work accurately, but if they're not, and even if there are a small number of false positives, then in the population of the UK, then you do end up having a high number of people going again on for testing for measures for additional NHS staff time, for example, which increases your costs and might be a misallocation of resources. So again, I think we need to consider what are the knock-on impacts of activity that comes out of this. And so I think there does need to be more focus in the community in general around healthy living and prevention, which I'm not sure is a place where the NHS has its strengths. To be honest, the NHS has been set up, and the healthcare system has been set up to be around reactive treatment. And the culture is very much around reactive treatment. And there is a lot of movement happening around population health and around prevention, but I'm not sure whether that is possible to the extent that it needs to be.
So just a question for you, just because we've gone about 10 minutes, we've got a little bit of time here to explore a few of these lines in greater detail. So on the prevention, because of course that's been a massive focus on the health of the nation strategy. We've argued for an increase in the budget to prevention from 5 to 15% by 2030. And obviously COVID's hit, and obviously we're going to, the whole economy is going to be in dire straits, etc. So that's going to obviously have to be revisited. But there is a point made earlier about one of our participants about the role of the insurance industry in prevention. Is that something that you are exploring? Because I know you're head of innovation at RCGP, and I'm just wondering whether there's some scope really for more collaboration and working with the business sector in looking at prevention.
I think that's a fantastic question. So myself personally, within my role that I hold within the RCGP, we're not exploring that kind of link. I think there's a lot of concern, I would say, that you might inadvertently burden people who are at a disadvantage. So there's a lot of talk around healthy living is great, but if you have to hold down 2 jobs, you're a single parent, and it's easier and cheaper to go to the takeaway down the corner, then that might be more convenient, which then has knock-on impacts obviously for your health, which might impact your insurance as well. So it's how do you make it into a virtuous cycle that doesn't disadvantage people?
Yes.
would be my question. And there's a lot of concerns around, I think it's more related to the American healthcare system really, but
Yes.
there's concerns around if you share data with the healthcare system, what does that mean? With the insurers, what does that mean for your insurance rates, etc., your premiums?
So I think you've raised some really good points about aligning, interests around, in the end of the day, around individuals and this user centricity, and the US system has been accused of very perverse interests and incentives operating in their healthcare system, as we know. But equally, there are some obviously in our shores as well. So it's some interesting points coming up, but I'm just going to go to Ruth now. So Ruth, would you like to say a few words?
Yes, sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ruth.
Firstly, I'd like to say how much I appreciate the fact that several speakers mentioned how older people are undervalued, overlooked, and I should add also stereotyped. I mean, an image of a crippled and mentally crippled old person is shocking, but it keeps coming up. Anyway, that's speaking partly from personal experience, but generally too. Anyway, the main thing I'd like to say is a few words about Alzheimer's disease, apropos healthy life expectancy. There's a strong likelihood that a common virus is involved in the disease in at least 50% of patients. This virus is a so-called cold sore virus, herpes simplex virus type 1, HSV1 in short. It's very unlike the coronavirus. It's much more insidious, and it slowly damages, but invisibly, the brain over a period of years. The extreme concern and anxiety about the coronavirus should, I think, be felt also for this virus and Alzheimer's disease. There is anyway, luckily, a very good likelihood that antiviral agents could treat the disease successfully, at least in many patients, not in all probably. And in fact, a recent review I wrote discussing this and related matters was cited in The Health of a Nation, which was very gratifying. However, unfortunately, funding in the UK for this research and also for a clinical trial of an antiviral agent has been almost non-existent, either from the relevant charities or from the main UK funding bodies. Now, I say that with some feeling because I and 9 clinicians had been applying for several years for funding for a clinical trial of an antiviral, and every time they got turned down. So there's a great deal of opposition, which is not supported scientifically. No scientific arguments are ever put against it, but they're unfortunately people who hold that are very influential in the Alzheimer's disease field. So what I'm saying is, can business step in? They would get a very vast return for their input if money could be put into both research and funding clinical trials with appropriate agents.
Absolutely. So points well made, Ruth. And I know that was a point that we made quite strongly in our Health of the Nation report about the need for funding in areas that are very underfunded and a much more holistic view also on disease. I mean, which is also, I think, coming up in some of the questions about what are we measuring. And I think, we can measure very specific things, but may not be measuring the right thing, if you see what I mean. So I know there are a few people there. Does anyone want to step in with any observations or points? I'm going to let the observers come in here because we've got a little bit of time. Would anyone like to comment on what we've heard so far? Anyone like to put up their hands?
Hello.
Susan. Hi, Susan.
Hi
Good
there.
to see you.
There are so many interesting points, and I think the internalized ageism is a huge worry, and also what Ruth was just saying. I had Louise Aronson, the amazing geriatrician, who is also high profile in the US. Her book, Elderhood, recently came out, and it's New York Times bestseller, and it was named a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. And she was making the point that over 65, no tests are ever done. In the healthcare setting, we only have the default white male, middle-aged, 40s, saying when it starts, and no tests are done on the diverse, heterogeneous population that is the over 65s. So the COVID impacts at 65, 75, 85, there are all kinds of differences in how this virus manifests itself in an older population. And there's never any attention paid, like it is broadening it out, like it is with pharmacological impacts on females as opposed to males. So we need to start somehow paying more attention to focusing on not just the default test subject.
Very important points. Carol, you wanted to say something. You just have to unmute yourself.
So, I just would raise again the plea for this, some sort of a sense of a forum in which we can bring these things together with representatives from diverse industry, as it were. To think these through, because it's absolutely clear that the pharmaceutical industry still, even after multiple exhortations to include older people, have found it hard. It's really hard to include older, frail people. I can see Pritesh is nodding. It's been an exhortation for a long time. And in the dementia, in the Alzheimer's world, the disconnect between the pharmaceutical trials on healthy, younger onset, who actually are rarer, is really stark when you look in the population, and the median age of onset is 84, 85. So the actual relationship between the evidence and what GPs and we see public health on the ground is very stark. So I think we need to everything. I completely agree about the co-production, but it would be incredibly helpful to start something in a relatively neutral environment, a safe environment, to have the discussions, to set the principles, so that we could start the hairs running about the things, about the metrics and what might be appropriate measures, what's appropriate for all those 5 areas, business as employer, business as innovator, all of those things, because they will be different for all of those. And I would certainly, I think academia has something to bring to that. I think we could make the virtuous circle by gradually changing, maybe quickly changing the narrative from the top, as it were.
Absolutely. So Tara would like to step in.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a point about stereotypes. We've done a lot of work on the stereotypes and social cohesion, and we also are interested in the visualization and verbalization of age. And the thing about stereotypes is that it's negative not only for older people, but also for younger people who equally derogatory statements are made. So it's just the way we somehow seem to have gotten into the way of thinking that we're all in little buckets and we're all the same. Because what we found is really the needs, the values, the attitudes that are cohesive across generations. And most people do not even reflect this. If you're an 83-year-old or an 18-year-old, you don't see yourselves as being a cohort with your own age group or chronological age group. It's the other things that bring us together, which are important, that we should be focusing on.
So it sounds to me, so just because we've got about 2 minutes remaining, just going back to this point about the values, I mean, some of the points that I've noted down is it's this age diverse approach. All ages count, for want of a better word. I mean, we have to stop thinking, in terms of these delineations. I think this theme of collaboration and the interconnectivity of everything is really important, because I think that also we're hearing a lot about communities, and the actions that we take as an individual are also connected with our wider sort of circle as well. And I think there is that interconnectivity piece, which is an interesting one. The co-creation piece is really important. Aligning interests is also really important. So I think does anyone want to say anything more about the values that really we need to be sort of bringing back to the main forum? I mean, I like obviously Carol's idea about the forum. I mean, and we've got 58 seconds left. I like Carol's idea about the forum, which of course, what comes out of this group could lead to that. And we've talked about a task force, for example. But any other comments on the values before we leave?
Yes, please, if I could say something.
Yes, of course, Janet.
It's particularly important, I think, that we start to teach that aging is not a dreadful thing. That we start to do it from the beginning. Just because wrinkles occur, it's nothing to do with, the fact that your brain isn't necessarily wrinkled. I mean, that's the important thing. And you can go about and do stuff. And I think that there needs to be a lot more connectivity between older and younger people, and particularly, of course, within the workplace. Older people need to be allowed back in and really helping get the system working as a whole system of society.
Absolutely.
Divided up.
Absolutely, and we're going to go back now. Right, are we all back? I think we're all back now. Right, I think, yes, I think we're all back. I see a lot of faces. So I'm going to turn to the first group first. So we've got 2 minutes per group. The facilitators will each have their chance to feedback what has come out of the group. So I'm going to go to Hugh first. So Hugh, are you there, please? Ah, there you are. Excellent, Hugh. It's your turn. You've got the stage for 2 minutes.
So thank you very much, Tina, and thank you very much for the group that I was allocated to. Absolutely wonderful and inspiring.
Excellent.
A broad view, but if I can draw some themes together. So we're not victims, we're human beings, and this should be agelessness. So it's not about ageism, it's about agelessness. It doesn't matter how old you are, you have value to add. It's not about retirement, but renaissance. It's about happiness. So there was a beginnings of we coalesced around happiness, joy, well-being. There was a sense that we need to have personal well-being strategies. So right from the earliest days in the school, trying to enable people to understand that is part of this is your responsibility to enable well-being, and the other part maybe society. And then we had a fantastic explanation from Peter, who's over in the States, and he was talking about collaboration, enabling intergenerational understanding, how businesses can lead that, how businesses can enable that, how they can be encouraged through proper analysis of their bottom line. So creating a more significant return on investment, moving from the functional to the strategic and less extractive and more adding value. Building up people's confidence, inspiring people, making sure that people understand that if they collaborate intergenerationally, that actually that's a more powerful way of delivering a better quality of product, and you have more fun, and you're not just locked into your own little group. And I'd say my final comment there, drawing it all together, is clearly the leaders at every level, right up to the very highest level, the leaders have got to begin to understand they have a responsibility to inspire people and a responsibility to set the conditions to enable agelessness and joy.
Excellent. Very, very well put and on time as well. Fantastic. So we're going to go to David Porter next. David, would you like to take the stage for 2 minutes, please?
Well, thank you very much. I had a fantastic group. They were very intellectual, very thoughtful. We concentrated on, I think, the idea that there were 3 stakeholders involved in this. I guess we're talking about business, the ingredients for measuring what businesses are doing about health, etc., and the values that are underpinning that. But we felt that businesses were not in a sort of a vacuum, they were in a context. And the context was business, the state, and the individual. And all our conversations sort of reverberated about that. One of the points that came out a number of times was it's a very difficult time now to ask businesses to do anything other than survive and recover from, frankly, the worst recession that certainly I've seen in my lifetime. And therefore it's going to be quite a big ask to ask them to do anything other than to recover from what's happening. But having said that, we felt that the state had a big role to play in the moment. If you're in a situation where you're trying to recover as a business, you're going to do anything that's permissible to make profits and survive. And that may not be always the thing that's most helpful for the wider sort of community. So we had that sort of balance between the state setting the rules and maybe helping the business get towards the sort of right ingredients. We hoped that if there was more data being shared about how well people were doing, so if your business was really bad at hiring people over 50 or whatever, or your business had very unhealthy people and it was known, maybe that would shame you into doing the right thing. And also we did feel that even without the state pushing, without the individuals pushing, the business themselves, some of the things that we wanted to happen were good for profits, like obviously having a healthy workforce and having a workforce that was the best you could get, irrespective of their age. But we also had the thought that the individual has a lot to play here, because I brought up the point which worries me, that a lot of businesses are actually doing things that are actively unhealthy, like pushing fast food, etc.
Absolutely.
I've probably run out of time. Either that's got to be state organised, or it's got to be, again, coming from data and people effectively being shamed to do the right thing.
Yes, good points, David, and that's something that we'll be looking at in more detail in a bit later. But I'm just I'm going to go to Chris now, Chris Winridge. Chris, are you there? Chris? Hold on.
Hi, Tina.
Hi, Chris. Your stage, 2 minutes.
Gets you every time. Thanks so much. Like the others, had a great group and covered a lot of ground. Dexter was up first, and he talked particularly about using data to identify those at risk, those vulnerable, and he had some ideas on that front, so we'll document those for you. Start with Alistair, who had some very interesting comments about healthy homes and the design of that, and the ability in a healthy home with the technology that's around to actually collect some information which might help detect those who are vulnerable and so on. So that I thought was an interesting point. He observed that there were some black holes in the existing statistics and data that is collected. It's taken at some arbitrary point in time. It doesn't necessarily reflect now, as we all know during this current crisis. We all wished we'd had information that we turned up later on. So this Internet of Things age we're in, I think there were some possibilities there we should explore. I thought that was a really good point. Then some comments about the use of existing indexes from OECD, from Alexander J. Again, I think, to the point, let's not reinvent the wheel, let's use what's there. Let's aggregate the data, mine it a bit more, expose it to more people to look at it. That's often how you create understanding. I think that was good. A question, I suppose, about how far to go with the collection of statistics. We often get bored if we just pick up data for data's sake. This has to be crucial data, so we need to be very focused on that. I think Alexander's suggestion was we just end up with below 65 and over 65 as an age point, and let's not worry too much about all the fine detail if we're going to sort of come up with something very quickly that can be deployed. That was good. And lastly, Harish talked about the skills and knowledge of older people. 76% thought they were somewhat on the shelf. They had skills and contributions to make. And in lockdown, I think lots of families are finding things passed on from the older generations to the younger is quite valuable in terms of experience. I think that was wise. Jeffrey made some useful comments as well because he was sitting on the call, but I'll leave him to repeat those in the sum up. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Chris. That's excellent. So we're going to go to the fourth group. Roland, would you like to have your 2 minutes, please? Roland.
Yes, I would. I'm going to try and share my screen.
Okay.
That's all right.
Oh, you're getting very fancy.
I'm just using, no meeting is complete without post-it notes. So,
excellent.
I thought we'd do something like this online.
Excellent.
So, similarly to the others, we had a really rich discussion. In the middle, the core ingredients measuring business contribution to health. I just want to pull out a couple of things. The first was about the fact that research is fundamental to producing these kind of ingredients and knowing what to look for. And there was some suggestions around how science and particularly academia and industry working together to kind of work out what it's worth measuring would be a good place to start. Then we talked a little bit about business as an employer and business as a provider of goods and services, and that there would be different things to be measuring in those two different camps. On the employer side, the key message, I suppose, was about people being treated as not being treated as resources, and that the conditions that the company set for its employees improve health and boost well-being. And some of the measures that were thrown out, maybe how we might do that, we're thinking, do employees feel that they're trusted? Do they have the opportunity to exercise their capability? Do they feel like they're being in flow? Does the company learn when it makes mistakes? I mean, some really interesting things. I don't know how easy those would be to measure, but just some ideas. On the business as a provider of services side, we talked about attempting to change the kind of culture of consumers and ways in which things like free-range eggs and fair-trade coffee have become kind of commonplace, if not dominant. And maybe in terms of measurements, we could be looking at production methods, impacts and outcomes on older people in particular, or outcomes that boost health and well-being of whichever consumer group they're looking at. And lastly, I think I'll just pick up on practice, on the sort of value, which was around healthy aging as a lifelong practice and kind of capability growing through life and extending, not ending.
Perfect. Very, very good, and we'll try and, I love your innovation of bringing in the whiteboard. We might try that for the next one. So that's excellent, Roland. So thank you so much. So really interesting points. Now, I facilitated the last one because Letitia couldn't join us, so hopefully I will do justice. So we had an interesting group, and we had a little bit of a discussion afterwards, and I'm just going to also time myself because I have a habit of going over time. So Janet kicked off really to make the point, as I think has been made quite strongly with the other feedback sessions, is this whole concept of agelessness that we should embrace and value. That, just because you're older doesn't mean you're sort of old and decrepit and all the sort of things that people tend to sort of think about, which is obviously a massive issue we need to tackle and picks up on the ageism point as well. So stereotypes, all these sorts of things really need to be tackled. And all ages count. I think this whole piece around collaboration, co-creation really came out quite strongly and picks up, I think, on some of the points that Graham had made about the interconnectivity of all the different stakeholders, which perhaps is often missed in the way that things are measured at the moment, and often, and Pritesh made the point, whereas the innovation had the RCGP, is that, we have QOF, we've got a lot of measures, but sometimes, they may not be measuring the right thing, or they may have unintended consequences, so we have to be very, very careful about what we measure, which of course is a very important point that Tara also made, is what are we measuring and why are we measuring it? And I think we had a bit of a discussion around prevention and preventative health, and how do we align the system and incentivize the different stakeholders, obviously including business as one, but of course with government and academia, and of course our citizens ourselves. How do we do that? Carol Brain, she made the point that we do need a forum. Potentially this is something that this group could do, where we could really bring together and look at this in a way that can, with diverse interests and perspectives, to be able to do this in a way that perhaps isn't being done at the moment effectively. So we had a lot of discussion around that, and my time is up, so I will stop there. But again, a very, very interesting discussion that had many perspectives. Now, and I do see some shared themes coming up, but I'm just going to pick up on a couple of questions that I've seen on the chat line. So we now have about 10 minutes now for some question and answer, and I have looked at the chat lines just to get a sense of where the questions were coming from. And I think there's two things. We've got this concept of agelessness, and we've also got this issue around healthy aging, starting young, preventative health. This question about how can we really incentivize all the different actors, and including business, to really focus on this. We keep on coming up against this issue around how do we really get business to act. I mean, we've got the values that we've talked about, the values of agelessness, co-creation, co-production, it seems to be coming through. How do we actually incentivize and do it? The how is a question I'd like to go around, perhaps our lead discussants, and looking at agelessness and tackling ageism as sort of one aspect, but also prevention, health prevention. How do we actually just make this happen? What are some of the models that we can look to? So I'm going to go around the table. Who would like to go first from our lead discussants to kind of pick, to look at that? Anyone would like to go first, just to make a comment? Or perhaps make another reflection on what we've heard from the feedback sessions?
Happy to pick up on that, Tina.
Excellent.
I think there's so much there's so much ambition, so much innovation. I think in order to make it happen at kind of a system-wide level, we really need to learn from each other. Back to the principle of collaboration. So sharing best practice, I think, is really, really key. But also then taking that back to the data and the evidence. So we can't do that without proving its effectiveness. And this is back to linking up with academia, linking up with the data that we have available, and being able to demonstrate success, but in a sort of a collective way.
So one question I've got from you, because it came up in a couple of the chats. I mean, with the healthy aging consensus statement, the business community, they weren't particularly involved in that. But is that something that we can do at the next stage, for example? I mean, if we were to come together, taking Carol's idea about this forum, because I think, that is often what is missing. We all have our sort of silos and ways of doing things. And I think the theme that's really coming up strongly here is that we do have to come together and co-create and do things in a different way. So would you like to perhaps comment on that? And maybe we can explore that in more detail.
One of the consensus statement was bringing in those that were already doing work in this space to try and already kind of get some momentum behind this. Obviously, in the light of COVID, terrible circumstances, but on the flip side of that, it does provide us with an opportunity to bring in other sectors, because everybody has already had to take a look at the way they're working, and think differently about their offer and their support to staff and their services they offer. So I think now more than ever, this is so meaningful to businesses. We need to reach out, use the power of the masses that we already have to, understand how we can have shared priorities with businesses. Actually, good health equals efficient business.
Yes.
And if we can kind of make that case and demonstrate that case, then actually business contributes to health as a health champion, whatever the industry and whatever the sector.
Yes. Fantastic. Any other comments on that? Perhaps Carol or Henry?
Tina?
Yes, David. Excellent. Yes.
And Carly, just in terms of the consensus statement, I wasn't aware of the work around that, but it's certainly something that I can take back to colleagues in the people team at the co-op. And we've got a huge amount of activity around inclusive employment. We've got a fairly diverse workforce in terms of age profile. I don't know the numbers of how it compares, but it's certainly something that we're aware of, recognise as being a benefit to business, having a wide range of ages in our among our colleagues. So it's something that I can take back, and I'll get in touch about it.
Thank you so much, David. Any other comments? Carol, you'd like to say something about
Yeah, so I suppose I'd just like to pick up something about the way in which we have the dialogue with business, which shifts the narrative towards benefit and population health and well-being, which will lead to healthier ageing. And clearly there are good case examples around. But what would be fantastic is if we could pick up some of Graham's points, which is about what already exists, and then the forum. If we could create this forum, then that's something that the forum could pick up, which is looking at legislation and the regulatory frameworks to say, what are the things that already exist there that can be used and set against the evidence base on what we know about healthy aging, to kind of encourage, nudge, and so on, and then build on that approach, build out from that approach, not forgetting that there is a big challenge for future aging from the gig economy and those who are passing through unemployment in younger ages now. I mean, we're going to see a big change. So the more we can do to try to shift the narrative now, the better, I think.
Absolutely. Well, so let's so I think an action from this, and we can pick up on this also in the fourth roundtable, is what this forum could look like and what do we look at in this forum, and also representation. I mean, I'm struck by often where we often get wrong is not involving the right diversity in coming, in these sorts of in these forums and gatherings, making sure we have that diversity of views and perspectives. So one thing I just thought I would pick up also that was mentioned at the first roundtable in terms of the values. We talked a lot about kindness. We talked a lot about bravery. We talked a lot about resilience, actually. And I just picking up, there's a few comments coming through on local. And I know, obviously, David, you mentioned this. So that was one of your values, local. Any comments on that? Because I think what we're seeing is this huge, incredible, locally driven response. And that could be part of our resilience as a nation moving forward. Would anyone like to comment on that?
Yes, can I say something?
Yes, of course.
I think that's really important. I think what's really been demonstrated by, in particular, this COVID crop, is that people have got themselves organised locally, very, very locally, to make a difference in their own local communities. And I think putting that emphasis on enabling people to take and have some control and responsibility and participate in their good health at a very local level, all by collecting the same information from the impact of those interventions is really important, because people there will participate in what's being offered, and they'll feel some control over what's being offered.
So maybe we need to think about bringing that local, that perspective, because that came up quite strongly in the Health and Nation work that we were doing all throughout last year. We were devising our strategy. Now, I'm just conscious of time, and I'm going to bring in Jeff to just say a few closing words before we break up the official meeting. But as we've done with the other two, we'll keep the line open. We can continue the conversations going. And actually, there's been a lot of richness coming through in the more sort of informal chat after the official meeting closes. So do hang on after the line. So I'm just going to go to Jeff, so that we've got a couple of minutes left before we have the official close of the meeting. Jeff, would you like just to say a few words?
Thanks, Gina. Again, I thought it was a very rich and thoughtful process. I thought framed well by Carly that the relevance of health to wealth, the relevance of a healthy nation to business could not have been made clearer. And that is an enormous opportunity to try to get some really serious commitment by businesses to think about how they can maximise their contribution and be a major player in this. Many are doing so, not enough are doing so. I think we've got to look at what's there already. I think looking at the public health consensus statement clearly is a crucial part. Carol's point, as ever, thinking about how you embed in any business coalition a proper evidence-informed and evidence-building process. So academia sits as part of that. We would be mad if it just became a sort of a hand-waving and talking shop, cosy, but perhaps not as influential as it should be. For me, I think that we've probably got to very quickly make a judgment about phasing. For me, I would focus the effort initially on trying to build a business coalition. I'm not sure that's the same as a business forum, so we may need to clarify what we are talking about on this. But why start with a coalition? Because you're trying to build a coalition of the willing who can see interest and benefit in it to build momentum. The index itself is a very important idea. It's to try to incentivise by good and bad metrics those who could do more, need to do more, and must do more. Much more complicated, be easier to get that going when you've built up a platform of businesses of all sizes who basically say we recognise that business has an enormous contribution to make and businesses have some proper roles to play. We may need to think about the weight between, is it both business as an employer or is it as business and products and services? Obviously it ought to be both, but there's plenty of work going on employment. Where is the need greatest? Where is the opportunity greatest? So some very good questions, some very good ideas, and I thought it was extremely impressive. And not to forget the point that Carol and others made, lived lives, real people, real experience has to find access into this, whatever we are going to seek to promote and build over the next few months. So thanks, Tina.
Absolutely fantastic, Jeff. So thank you so much. So we're going to, the one thing I would just mention, nutrition keeps on coming up everywhere in every single round table. So that's something we'll kind of take offline and think about more carefully. And the role of the food industry, etc. So that's an interesting one which we can look at in more detail. So we're going to keep the lines open for an informal chat. But this effectively is the official end of the meeting. So for those who do need to leave, thank you so much for your contributions. Again, a very rich session today. So thank you so much for your support and involvement. And we'll carry on the discussion for those who'd like to stay. So we had, so we've still got quite a few of us on the line. So again, another interesting discussion. I hope we've managed to air at least some of the previous sort of key questions and some of the comments coming back from the previous meetings. And here's your chance to pipe up if we haven't. And also, if we haven't adequately addressed any of the questions that came up so far on the chat line. Obviously, there's been so many coming through. And I had my eye on them, but I wasn't expecting to facilitate, so I had less time to actually look through all the questions, for the breakouts. So, yes, would anyone like to kick off with a comment or a question? It's open to everybody. Graham, you'd like to go.
I'll put something in. One of the things I learned in my first career as a physicist was if something isn't working, you have to drill down to the fundamentals to change it, especially if it's something as deeply interconnected as what we're talking about is. And the other thing I learned, which is also driving what I'm doing, is my career as a manager with Procter & Gamble, which is the results you're getting them because whatever strategy and processes you're using are perfectly designed to deliver those results. So if you don't like the results, don't just try to impose something to make them better. Don't try and fit them through rhetoric. You really have to go back down to what is actually driving what you're doing, which may be nothing like what you think is driving it. The strategy you have and that is driving your results may not be the strategy that you thought you were using when you wrote it down in the first place.
Absolutely. I think that's a really, really important. What are we actually trying to do here? What is it that we want is so important. Anyone would like to comment on that? So Richard, Richard Swift. Do unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. Graham, I agree with you absolutely. I come from a physics background as well. I think there's a real, let's just tease this one out fairly gently, if I may. There seems to be a real dichotomy here. If you take yourself in the position of just the average 60-year-old working class, lower middle class, sort of average person who's taught to trust the government and rely on the government, and also that big business is a good and responsible corporate citizen and all that sort of stuff, then the messages that are coming through, rightly or wrongly, are taking our COVID-19 experience here. Lock yourself, this is lockdown, shelter in place, stay quiet, and we the experts until we the experts sort this out. It is not a participatory exercise at all. It is, we'll sort this out. You just sit quietly until we do. The same happens in a lot of areas, really. Food, for instance, we have, as I was mentioning in the breakout group, we have trading standards protecting us. We have the Food Standards Agency protecting us and the rest of it. So how does government say, look, an awful lot of this food that's produced is absolute, looks like food, tastes like food, but it's designed that way, but it really isn't food. There's a tremendous problem there for government or any official agency to say what these mega companies are making isn't bloody unhealthy crap. You can't really do that. But if it's monitored by government agencies, people will assume it's safe and good and decent stuff to have. So there's a real problem. So there's an inadvertent disempowerment of people, and that they can be actors in their own specialism, but everything else, including their health and the rest of it, they outsource either to the NHS or they outsource it to government or trading standards or food standards agency or the MHRA or someone like that. But everything says, do what you're good at, but keep the hell away from the rest of it. Don't even criticise it because these are all institutions. That's the problem we've got really. And I don't know how to do that without sounding like some alarmist or whatever. But there's a real dichotomy there, and advertising people are so skillful at spinning things these days and staying within the rules, but if they don't do it, another company, if it's not the Skittles people who do it, someone else is going to do it, so we've all got to do it. And that, there's a real, so if government were to say that our job is to cover the bases, but this is really caveat emptor all the way through, read stuff yourself, just because we allow it doesn't mean it's safe. I don't know, I don't know the answer to this one, but but unless we do that, then people will always scrape around the inside edges of the rules and try and expand the rules so they can fulfil their expectations to shareholders. I think is the heart of the problem.
So interesting, Richard. I've got my own views on all this, but I'll let someone else go first if anyone would like to comment, because we've had a lot of questions coming through on the importance of nutrition and healthy eating, and obviously with that, how the food industry can support that. Any comments on that? Because I think Vanessa, you'd like to mention something.
Yeah, hi Tina. It's really interesting during our group. Pritesh mentioned, the busy mom with 2 jobs, and a takeaway because she doesn't have time for anything else. And I think in the last group, somebody else mentioned that the issue wasn't necessarily what people were eating at home, but rather, as soon as they get to work, they're back to eating, what Richard said, which is something that looks like food and is marketed that way, but isn't. And I know, I do some health consulting here myself. And, I often have, highly intelligent, highly educated people of all ages who, keep asking me, what great supplements they can take, and while they're eating, a muffin and a can of Red Bull for breakfast. And so there really is something quite terrifying around, all of these food outlets being somewhat within the regulations. But really at the other end, we're seeing the results, which are not really what we want. So really addressing, I'm not sure whether it's the advertisers or the regulatory bodies around what is being sold, and the food that's being sold is it's not really fit for purpose and is having devastating impacts on our population.
Points very, very well made, Vanessa. I'm conscious, and I could talk for hours about this, and I'm sure a lot of us could. Now, Jill, you've been very good about using the technology to show your hand raised, so I've noticed it. So I'll let you go next.
I think I went to a talk by Camilla Cavendish when she launched her Time book,
Yes.
at the Recognition Foundation, and one of the things that stayed with me was the fact that governments are very unlikely to actually do anything that you can't kind of measure. So the idea of preventing something is something they find very hard to spin into a positive. And so the obesity issue, and I don't know how she managed to get the sugar tax kind of through, and I know that there's been a lot of trying to get it unraveled, but I feel like there's something about trying to figure out a way that the government could get what they want out of encouraging people to look at their nutrition, look at their mind, you know, the kind of their health around working. I don't know, dentists, for example, I think have done this better. Dental health, I think, is probably better. So I just wanted to say, I feel like it's one of those impossible things that's been around for so long. And people's nutrition, they don't know much. So a lot of people who you think would know about nutrition just don't. And so it's so basic.
I mean,
so that's all I'm saying.
Well, I mean, my observation is that there seems to be more and more being written about food and nutrition, and you know, there's a lot of talk about the microbiome, and of course there's a lot of research now that shows how important what we eat is on our, you know, genetic expression and all these sorts of things. I mean, I think, you know, the science is definitely coming through much more strongly now on the important role of nutrition. And of course we do have some fairly, I mean, you know, Camilla is obviously quite outspoken about her views on this, and has you know, done incredible things to kind of get it on the agenda, as it were, at government level. But there are some other people who for example, Tim Spector, you know, who's written, you know, who's the geneticist at KCL, who's been writing a lot about diets, and is just about to publish another book, you know, pretty much calling out the food industry for the kind of quackery and the sort of quack research that has supported a lot of the, you know, the claims that are made by a lot of food manufacturers and in advertising and all the rest of it. So I think, you know, so that we may find that starts to become a bigger issue as the science starts to become more prevalent about really what is going on, and as the public gets more informed about this. That's just me sort of conjecturing, but I think, but it's a really interesting thing, because you can see just in all the chats, you know, nutrition and what we're eating and obesity. I mean, it's at the heart of the issues around healthy aging. Yeah.
One of the things that is people don't like talking about, and there's something a few weeks ago about, you know, doctors have to start saying to people, you know, one of the big things is that you're fat.
Yeah.
You know, actually not sort of literally sugarcoating these things. Actually, there's a link, it seems to me, between very much poorer outcomes in these types of things if you're unfit.
Yeah. So Roy just said, you know, this point about regulation. I mean, I think this is something that, you know, we will have to look at to really tackle. It's so fundamental an issue, but you're right, and I think, Jill, you know, you are right in the sense that I think there is potentially a huge role for the employers to really tackle this, and this is where, for example, Pamela Gallatley, who was speaking at the last roundtable, was making this point about risk assessment and individual risk assessments, and trying to communicate and help people, you know, what is it that's keeping them trapped in ill health. So I think they may find it easier than a GP. I think the contract is slightly different, isn't it? It's the nature of the relationship. But again, these are all the things that, you know, we have to look at. Any other points around that? I know. So Adrienne, you wanted to say something Adrienne, would you like to say something? Oh, we can't hear you.
Because I'm in the country, right?
There we go.
I think we have a domino effect that we can create. And I believe that we can use some of the people who are the problems to be the solution, and explain right in what you're talking about. If we start with behavioral health, folks themselves, like me, are people who are now the vulnerable population, just use the field, and everybody else down the line, understand good nutrition, exercise, and the incredible impact it has on the body. We're going to create a demand. We've created a demand for green. We've created a demand for vegan and for sugar-free.
Yeah.
And I used to work as a journalist investigating, actually, in the U.S., lobbyists for the food industry. The big food companies, there are only 8 of them. And they actually have a lobbying group in Washington. And I spoke to them, and I know them, and I can tell you, they have tremendous research on good food, good health, and everything else. said to me, we're just waiting for people who want to fight. So this is what I mean by the domino effect. We can start with regulation, we can start with exposés of those industries, but if we start with demand to those industries from the consumer, we start that domino effect.
Yeah.
Then we also get the advertisers involved.
Absolutely.
This may be a U.S. phenomenon, and you may all be too young for it. Very quickly, we had something called Black is Beautiful. And that was created by the Ad Council, a non-profit organization, huge in the United States. And overnight, people of color became models, were on the front of magazines, and not Ebony magazine, but GQ magazine, Vogue, and so on. It changed the entire perception of a particular group. You can do that with agents, but we need advertising.
So I completely agree with you. We have to get the advertisers and marketers on board, absolutely. And this is absolutely the fundamental kind of thing at the heart of really, they have a key role to play in this to get the message out to the public. I'm just conscious, I had Barry who had raised his hand, and also Roy would like to say something. So I'm going to go to Barry Sharples first. Barry, are you there? There you are. Hi, Barry.
Thank you, Tina. Sorry, I can't wave.
That's okay. I can sell your note.
I just see this as a very age-old problem. I mean, we've got a lot of new data, of course, coming out, scientific data regarding health and diet. But there is, as Richard says, that I come from a working-class area in the north where education has been limited, and I think a lot of this comes down to education. If you educate people to fully understand what they put in their mouth and how much they move about and exercise, it always goes back to those two things. And yes, you've got the bad actors in terms of the food manufacturers that need sorting. But if you've got an ill-educated population, then and they are the ones. You've talked, I've been on the last 3 calls, you've talked about how the poorer people, the difference between poor people and rich people in terms of the way that health affects them, then you've only got to look at hospitals. It would necessarily follow that hospitals will have more poor people in them than wealthy people. And you look at the food served in hospitals, you look at the concessions in hospitals, and the type of rubbish you can buy in hospitals. It drives me mad. I've spent a lot of time in and out of hospitals over the last 12 months, and you've got to start, it's grassroots stuff. It really is education. And stop people living for. We're talking about aging here. The whole thing is about anti-aging. We as Microgen, we're doing a lot of research with regards to stem cell technologies and healthy aging. But you've got to start with exercise. You've got to start with good food.
It's the fundamentals.
Education is key, isn't it?
I couldn't agree more with you. I'm going to bring in a couple other people just to come. And I saw Carol. She's been very patient with raising her hand. So I'm going to quickly go to Carol, and then Roy, I'll come to you in a second. Just to, but keep. I am seeing.
Thanks. It's just to pick up the point about education.
Yeah.
So whilst I agree that education is incredibly important, and in fact in our dementia work with reduction in dementia age for age, education is seems to be a major contributor, although we don't exactly understand why or how. But there is also all the other things that were done. And Teresa Marteau isn't on this call, but she would say, actually, people who eat who are overweight, have high BMIs, smoke, take drugs, abuse alcohol, they do know. Actually, it's not a deficit of knowledge, but it's a lot to do. It's the environment. So what we need is both education and the environmental change, so that our physical, psychological, and emotional, commercial environments are all nudging us in the right way.
And this is why it's so important to, this is the only way we're really going to rein in, the issues that we know are the negative commercial determinants of health. They're very, this is why we have the problem that we do. The marketeers, the advertisers, who know, how we, consumer behavior. We have to kind of, these are the sorts of things that we need to look at, how people make their decisions, and it is, their environment and all the rest of it that are critical with that as well. So Roy, did you want to say something?
Yeah, yes. Hi everybody, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, you can. Right. Just a couple of things. Fascinating conversation, and one, Tina, you and I have had, I think, several times. I'll just two things. Two little insights. One of them is that when we talk to businesses, it's very important that we use their language. And so this community that we're building here, within it, there are some people with significant business background. And it is those people who probably should be the pioneers into those boardrooms where they make a difference. With all the support of the people with the right messages behind them.
Yeah.
The second point, this is a very interesting conversation here about food manufacturers. They're a very joined up issue, as Carol has clearly identified. Just to give you one example, I can walk 2 miles in that direction to a high street where there are 22 fast food joints in 250 metres. I can go 2 miles in that direction to the high street where there is one fast food joint in 250 metres. The longevity in that place is 87. The longevity in that place is 70. Frankly, this is a multiple variable issue, and it needs to be dealt with in that context. Planning, there's a food retailer, there's a food manufacturer, and many other things associated with that. I think Therese would have said that actually, if she'd have been on.
Absolutely, and it reminds me a couple of conversations that Jeff and I had actually with some of the local public health people at a local level, and what they do to try and promote healthier eating in their localities, which is why the interesting local approach and licensing laws and actually speaking to the local supermarkets, it's all to do with that.
Well made. My personal view is that if we want businesses to engage, we can engage with them locally through local public health directors, local adult social care directors. These are crucial engagements, which I don't think we make enough of.
No.
In fact, I don't often think they exist. So that's just difficult. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I think I think local is a really interesting theme that we have to build on, and it ties in with that resilience piece as well. And of course, as we move out of this crisis, it's going to be absolutely critical to rebuild really the nation, frankly, and and the whole levelling up that I know. So I've got two people with their hands up. So I'm just going to quickly go to Britt, and then I'll go to George because Britt was first. So Britt, would you like to say something?
Hello, Tina. Hello, everybody.
Hi, Britt.
Thank you for taking the meeting. Yes, I think I'm just picking up, I'm not a health expert, but something Carol said, and I think it's been picked up throughout. I also don't believe education is the bottom line for going back to the food. I think addiction is something I very rarely, if never, hear about with regard to food, and actually it's substance abuse in the same way. So that broader context of just telling people what works for them doesn't take account of the needs, what lies behind that, which might be, chemical, neurological and emotional and environmental and all of those other things. And it frustrates me that I rarely hear any reference in health bodies, the media, anything, which reflects that food can be the same addiction as drugs and alcohol. So that's
sugar addiction, I think Camilla talks about.
Well, they've shown that it's as, if not more, addictive than crack cocaine. So I think that I would love to see that recognised, and it's less parent to child as a transactional analysis tone of voice. It's more adult recognising it. Thank you.
Well, so I think education, the environments, these are all really important things to be able to address all these. George, would you like to comment?
So I suppose this is reinforcing Jeff's point about stage. In some of this conversations reminded me of my experience in front of the Lord's Science and Technology Committee Inquiry on Ageing,
where the Department of Health are really getting quite a rough time for there not being more cross-government action. And that sort of speaks, I think, to what Roy was saying. That I think part of this is the marginal gains from everyone doing something in that direction within their policy domain.
Yeah.
But then I come back to the thing that I think Roy picked up on that I was saying earlier, which is slightly separate. So talking to business and talking to business in their language. And I think there's a really important point that links into what Carol was saying about the role of evidence. And business will understand things if the case is there for them to act. And there are carrots and there are sticks, and we understand sugar taxes and things like that are sticks that changing behaviour. But I think an awful lot of what we're talking about is about carrots and trying to create some form of social movement or incentivisation for greater fairness. And I don't think that case is being made very strongly in business. I know there are early voices like Yvonne Sonsino, who's doing a great job of promoting that. But I think that probably needs backing up with more evidence. So if the idea of an index comes out, there has to be a value to business. Just making a business less competitive against its global competitors isn't going to help in this case. But having something, and it might be relevant to the locality piece, having something that makes people buy local, like red tractors and things like that. If there was a genuine value in that index, then it might change consumer behaviours and have a value like that as well. But
Absolutely.
It's really about the phased approach, and we're talking about an elephant here, really.
Yes. But we're used to tackling elephants in this group, George, as you know. Someone needs to tackle them. We might be foolish, but it's something that has to be done.
But business can't do it on its own.
No, exactly. No, absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more. Absolutely. I've got a couple of other hands up. I'm going to go to Svetlana, actually. Hi, Svetlana. Would you like to say something? You're on mute at the moment. Hi there. That's okay. Yeah, we can hear you now. Hello.
I wanted to slightly expand on what George was saying right now, but taking it a different trajectory in regards to how can we measure and that measure to facilitate investment into health and technology. And what we're seeing right now, that's really long-term technology and other investments are suffering at the expense of companies needing more working capital and just really trying to survive. But this cut in long-term investment obviously will lead to stagnation and loss later. So my question is, how do we make sure that we help those companies that innovate and also those companies that can benefit from innovation to collaborate, and how we can really facilitate that process now in order for us to benefit from that few years down the line.
George, do you want to comment on that, wearing your innovation hat?
Oh, goodness. But for me, my innovation hat is about trying to create the market incentives. Why would people want to do it? How do you create that? So I'm going to find that hard to comment on directly. But I do think, I'll go back to something. I thought Stephen Johnson, speaking at the IRC back in December, no, actually it wasn't the IRC, it was your event before with King's, which we're talking about creating a moral outrage. So that climate change has achieved a moral outrage where it's unacceptable not to think about that, and we haven't. That comes back to the evidence and the index and the value of doing that. That we haven't got the same outrage in this space yet.
We've got to create it.
And I think, so the flip side of this is that if you look at things like the silver economy, reports and things like that, all the talk about boomers having all the wealth, the 75% or whatever it is of wealth, there is value in business actually addressing these markets as well, and in advertising beginning to reflect the people who are actually their customers, etc. So it's not a nil-sum game, but and that's not a direct sort of feed on from what Svetlana was saying, but I do think we need to think about that incentive piece.
Yeah, and also how to drive. I mean, sorry, Svetlana, you go.
Sorry, can I just really comment a bit further on that? How the business condition can benefit and help companies by matching innovators, those companies that are good at generating ideas and prototyping solutions, with larger companies whose power and strength really lies in operational excellence. So and by matching those organizations together can create additional value and facilitate the innovation process.
Absolutely. I mean, and I know that George and Innovate UK have been trying to promote that collaborative kind of ethos, and I agree. I think that collaboration, and this is a theme that keeps on coming up over and over again. This is how we can do a lot more and better together. So that needs to be supported.
I suppose the other thing I'd say, Tina, is that we are investing in research with social sciences, with designers and all the rest of it, specifically looking at what can research bring, that sort of research bring to industry. Sorry, I should recognise, Carol, that includes behavioural research as well as social science. Early on, I think what we're finding is that these research communities aren't necessarily, leave design aside because they are, but a lot of research social and behavioural research communities are not really used to talking to business. And we're finding businesses actually more interested in the research than the researchers are in engaging business. But it's we're in baby steps, and today we launched our main research goal. So there's a lot of things to happen before we get there, but that is part of the importance of the research that we're funding.
So Carol chatted through this issue around kite marking and standards attached to that. I mean, that could be a route that we look at, because kite marks can be very, very effective and have worked in other contexts. So that could be an area that we look at. So these are all the things that we'll explore in terms of how do we incentivize and also drive this consumer piece as well. I'm picking up a few steps back on language as well, about how we even talk about growing older and aging. Does anyone have any comments about that? Because I think we've got to think so differently about this, and whether we need a common language, because that could be the way that we also cement and bring people together in an easier way. I don't know. Does anyone have any comments about that?
No, maybe it's time to pick up what Richard was saying. Sort of the idea that 70-plus-year-olds are sort of passively sitting inside the houses and they will be done onto. And the way that's unleashed a whole set of discussions in a whole variety of fora. And then linking that to the discussions just while we've been going on about the fact that aging is associated with illness, it is associated with disability, it is associated with independence, and as you get closer to death, it is associated with dementia. What we have to do is create an inclusive language that recognises that even when we have 4 or 5 conditions, or have impairments, or are in mild and moderate, have mild and moderate dementia, that we still have value and we still have something to contribute. And I think it was articulated earlier, but we don't really know what it is that we're asking individuals in those states or whatever. We've got this sort of idealised view of ageing in which we're all tremendously active and working part-time, but also running about and stuff. But that makes a whole massive proportion of people feel they've failed. So I think we've got to get the language, I completely agree, we've got to get the language right, and it is very easy to get it slightly wrong, either characterising people as being frail or, and I think you said decrepit, I don't know where it came from, but, or super healthy. Yeah. And also that's a generational thing. So I think the younger generation are a bit puzzled by all of this almost. Yeah.
I mean, I'll just mention one thing. I mean, what I found, going back to the point about the moral outrage, what I found interesting, last week when there's this where there was a little bit of an outrage moment when the plus-70s sort of said, why is it only us who are going to be sort of, having to keep self-isolating? And there's all these questions around, the perceptions that, of course we know that, if you're older, you're more likely to be at risk of COVID, but actually what it's really about is actually your health and your, and all these sorts of things, and other risk factors. So I just think it was quite interesting that there was that outrage that was voiced last week, and we need to, and it's almost like we need more of that, as to kind of make these points. But Richard, you were going to make a point.
Yes, it's just in terms of language and phraseology, as Carol was saying, I think the most dangerous, accurate word is retire. I'm going to retire, which means retreat, retire from. You don't retire. Retire is a word like very. It means qualification. And essentially it means retire from work, retire from active life.
Retire from life.
From participation.
Yeah.
If you're really lucky, you'll get to play football with your grandchildren 3 times a year, because that's what all the adverts show. Whereas, and also, okay, if you are then leaving work, retiring from work, what's your next purpose in life? Because what I am absolutely convinced of is that if people have a purpose in life, they will keep going. My grandfather was a classic, actually. The guy was 3/4 dead, but he was determined to go and dance with his wife on New Year's Eve. He left hospital, danced with his wife, went back to hospital and died 2 days later. And we hear a lot of this. So if people are too busy to get ill or whatever, that tends to become their reality.
Yeah.
Whereas if okay, I'm retired, so start winding down, and the body says, yeah, that's okay, fine, that's what I'll do.
Yeah.
So I think this languaging, this sort of, I don't know whether it's nudge theory or what it is, but it's very pervasive, it's subliminal and horribly effective.
Yeah.
And it's really not what we need to be hearing.
Absolutely. Prit, you have your hand up. Would you like to say something?
Yes, it was just this idea of language, and Adrian's just made a good point about images, because when I joined Hoxby, for example, which is a freelance collective that champions work without bias, they had a channel, a cause channel called Older Workers, and straight off I said, nobody wants to join it, and just older, everything is relative, and it's hard, so I looked at a whole raft of different terms, but and I haven't got the answer, and as Adrian says, maybe there isn't one, but I suppose two points, which is going to the moral outrage. It's interesting that just at one afternoon, say, listening to even Radio 4, particularly the comedy, and I know that's irreverent in its nature, but there is such blatant ageism, and the phrase old fart, and all of those things are so embedded, that cultural issue is so critical. But the thing I did in the Hoxby was try and bring all that together and develop a Mythbuster piece, and I wonder if there's a starter there to pull all of this to address very blatantly, the points Janet was making, all this thing about all these assumptions. So yes, there's language, and I just think addressing things head on maybe.
So I'm going to go to Graham in 1 second, but the one thing that occurred to me, I was invited to Singapore for this this global healthy longevity New Academy of Medicine challenge in February, actually, right before the whole COVID thing and right before we launched our Health of the Nation strategy. But one of the things that came up was this idea, language kept on coming up over and over again. There was almost like this view that we really needed almost like an international group looking at this. So it is obviously really, really, really fundamental and so important. So Graham, you wanted to say something. Oh, you've got your mute on.
Right. Just wanted to pick up as well on that point of language. most of us tend to think that reality is something that just is. And we all have the same experience of reality. But actually each of us experiences our own unique inner reality, and that is very, very powerfully shaped by the language we're using both in our internal dialogue, especially, and in our dialogue with our environment. And this is something that I find in the world of business, and it connects with Roy's point. If we're trying to communicate with somebody, and especially if we're trying to create visibility of new options and choices that will deliver fundamentally different results, what we're actually dealing with is the imperative for all of us to first of all adopt a new language that is consistent with this new reality that we are trying to create and bring into the world. And that is one of the toughest things to do. I mean, the last thing I'll say is physicists are reasonably good at this, because physicists in quantum mechanics really learn from a young age that how we interact with nature is part of creating the reality we experience, and that our normal language is completely inadequate at talking about what we're dealing with.
I think one learning that I'm taking away from this group is that whatever groups we have in future, we must always involve a physicist. Critical stakeholder. So I know George had to go. I think as usual, this is such a fascinating. These informal chats are almost more important than those sort of more formal chats, because there's so much that we can explore, and it's also important. So I know it's 10 minutes after 4. Does anyone and I see Britt has got another hand up. I don't know if that's an old hands up, but Britt, would you like to say anything? And thanks, Carol. You have to go.
One, but,
okay.
Yes, I think I would love to get more involved in the language, and I think it's been touched on that as an advertising professional, that there's a massive missed opportunity, quite apart from the sort of moral imperative.
Absolutely.
Employees are not in advertising, so at 50 they're chucked.
Yeah.
And it's a massive consumer group. So I think that's a business case that I'm very keen to make. Others I'm sure are doing so. Okay.
Absolutely, and we can look at that in our next step. So Vanessa.
Hi.
Hi.
I saw an article recently, which I'll send you, which is perhaps interesting, from a Japanese professor specializing around longevity, and he mentioned something around, the retirement age was set at 65 when people passed away at, 70, 72, and now the gap between 65 and somebody's passing is so much wider that this part of the life becomes almost without purpose, and that in itself is so detrimental to their health and their psyche.
Yes.
And I'm not saying that you should necessarily retire later, because I wouldn't want to myself, but I think we really need to have support around creating this new purpose, because without that, everything, it's not just the food, it's not just everything we're talking about, but without a sense of purpose, which obviously the work brings, we have this now period that has gone from 5 to 10 to 20 plus years, where you're in limbo, and really that has a detrimental effect on your health. So I'll try to find that article again.
No, but it's so fundamental. It's so fundamental, and each of us has our own purpose that guides our will to live and to keep going. I mean, and that's a very individual thing.
Yes.
But there's so much talk about purpose. I mean, and people often talk about the younger generation, where it's they're looking to work for businesses where the purpose is much more important, as a motivating factor to join that business. And I'm sure, Graham, you've got lots to say about this as well. But purpose, and this is, everyone is, needs to find their purpose, but I think more than anything, it's throwing a whole spotlight on what it is, and also business. I mean, I don't know, Graham, if you want to comment on that, because I know that's what you're in the business of doing, is helping companies align around a broader thing that unites all of us, around this bigger thing, around purpose.
Well, And what I find is for each individual having a very clear sense of purpose. And in many social science studies, that's come out as one of the top three fundamental needs that have to be satisfied for somebody to really have the basis that they need to thrive. And I also argue that it's equally true if you go up in a layer of complexity and you look at a business as an entity in itself. That's also a living system. And for it to truly thrive, it needs to have a very clear and compelling purpose. And perhaps, what's necessary then, a purpose is clear and compelling when it comes not out of navel-gazing. A purpose is not about what I want to do. A purpose is about something that meets an external need within the current context of that need. So this is where this whole conversation, I think, is really important, because it's helping us anchor ourselves. What is the external context in the here and now? What needs are there in the external context here and now? And therefore, what is the current purpose that I can choose, because it's the best match between what's needed in the context, what I'm uniquely gifted at doing, and what I enjoy doing, where I have fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting. So these are all the things that we'll be looking at in the next stage of all these discussions, and how that this purpose question, because what keeps on coming out over and over again is and especially as we're going through COVID. And we keep on coming up to this point that people are looking to health and well-being as a much more important thing in their lives. They're recognizing as being extremely valuable, and that we have to. So I think it's an interesting time to have these discussions and come up with a formula that will really help to drive through, how we think about this and how we operate. Different stakeholders working together to achieve, better health and well-being, obviously for the nation, which is obviously what the ABBG is looking at. So I don't know if anyone has any sort of other questions around that before we close. But as usual, this is a fantastic conversation, and obviously at the next stage, we're trying to be a little bit more crisp and come up with some working sort of hypotheses and proposals that we can look at and examine. Obviously, we're going to have this is all a process, and there's a huge, as you can see, there's a massive amount to digest and lots of opinions and perspectives. But what we're hoping to arrive at, and I hope everyone has signed up on the 22nd, is a discussion around next steps and how we form. Now, Carol had mentioned this idea of the forum. It could be that we take on some of the ideas that we had from that. We obviously have, Carly, we mentioned that, we could sort of look at, the consensus statement, build on that, having more of a dialogue with business on that, and shape it maybe at the next stage. So there's certain sort of ideas already. We've come up with the risk management framework that John Goffrey had spoken about. So these are all the sorts of things that we will be looking at as tangible ideas and solutions that we can take forward into the next stage. And of course, the role for legislation, regulation, etc., which of course are important too to address. So we're looking at this whole mix of different sort of ideas. So. Any other closing thoughts before we call it a day until next Tuesday? Richard. Oh, you're on mute.
It was just me waving goodbye.
Oh, thank you so much, Richard.
The closing thing, vote of thanks to Tina, because she's done a
Oh, well, thank you. Well, thanks to all of you. No, I'm so grateful for you all being involved. So I give my thanks back. So thanks so much, and we'll continue the conversation. I'm having lots of side conversation with lots of people, so keep the conversations going, and I'm definitely looking at those chats and the comments coming back. So yeah, so thank you so much. All right, we'll call it a day there. Anyway, thanks so much, all of you.
Thanks all.
All right, cheerio. Yes. Okay, bye.
and the others.